Hi everyone, come on in, make yourself comfortable. We'll give it a minute or so and then we'll kick off as people come in. Hi everyone, welcome along. We're just going to give another 30 seconds for people to join. So make yourself comfortable and we'll kick off in about 30 seconds. Okay, we're going to get started. So welcome along to our webinar on aged care. This can be a very confronting and complicated and challenging area, and that's why I'm really pleased today to be joined by two experts in the area, Evalesco advisors, Kathryn Daniels. So welcome back, Kathryn.
Thanks, Jeff.
And on debut in the webinar studio is Melody Edwards. Welcome along, Mel.
Thanks, Jeff.
So just to... Oh, you're on mute. During today's webinar, you're going to be on mute, so we can't hear you, nor can we see you. So feel free to move around and chat amongst yourselves at home. We do encourage you to ask questions along the way though, and you can do that by clicking on the Q&A tab, which you'll see, and typing in any questions that you might have. So we'll be checking in on those as we go through, and otherwise we'll save time at the end also for more questions. So please do fire away with those. So today's conversation is really suitable for anyone who might be considering their aged care options themselves, or who may be in a position to help someone else, such as a family member, parent or grandparent, consider their aged care options. However, because we don't know your personal situation while you're at home and we're in here, all we're talking about today is general advice only. And if you would like to know more, then we do encourage you to come along, have a chat to your advisor or reach out to us after the webinar. So on our agenda today, we're going to talk about where to start when we're considering options around aged care. We're going to talk about the process and the all-important costs, which can be complicated, and there are a few moving parts in that area as well. So we'll get stuck into it. So Mel, when we're thinking about where to start in the conversation, what do you suggest?
So when broaching aged care, our advice is to start early and to really have an open, honest conversation about it. As with a lot of milestone events in our lives, the earlier you start planning or thinking about things, the more likely it is to go according to your plan and not the whims of everything else. That's number one, the key point. Number two, I would say also is getting involved, everyone in that discussion, like family, who's going to be part of the caregiving roles, also kids, grandkids, anyone who you want to be involved and who can then have their say as well in how they think that should be approached. Because it's a very delicate situation, and everyone has their own idea of what they want. So being able to encourage and facilitate that discussion openly will make it easier, not only for the person going in care, but the whole family and the family unit.
Yeah, I think it's, like with many things, better to have the conversation before it becomes an urgent priority, because if you're trying to start those conversations in the process of making decisions, it can become awkward, rushed, and you sort of remove some of those options that might be available to you.
Absolutely.
And so you've had some personal experience recently, Kathryn.
Yeah,
Share
that's
with us
it.
how that went.
Yeah, after helping quite a few clients through the process, my family went through it as well with my nan. So if you're an Evalesco follower, you probably know my nan. She's the basketball playing 97-year-old. Well, she just celebrated her 99th birthday last Thursday. About 2.5 years ago, she was still living in her own place, her own house, which she'd been, for 50 odd years, and she wasn't able to really take good care of herself. But she's of that generation, very stubborn, and doesn't ask for help, but we could see that she needed it. So we tried to broach the subject for a couple of years, just because she would complain she wasn't seeing anyone. But she was, she was very adamant that she was staying in the home. So the conversation had been started early, but we weren't making a lot of progress. And then when we saw her starting to have real health concerns and, losing a lot of weight, so they became more pertinent. So, but it became really emotional because she didn't want to do this, and she had very old conceptions of what it was. So she was thinking nursing home, room sharing with other people, being left in a closet.
Dodgy food.
Yeah, that's it. And even though she'd seen my other nan be in like assisted living, she wasn't for her. But eventually we got her in there. She's got a really nice room, and even for the first 6 months, she used to put a bit of pressure on my parents, saying, I don't want to be here. She'd ring them. What have you done? I want to go home. Didn't understand that the home had been sold for her to live there. But now we've got to a place that when I saw her last Thursday for her birthday, she looks really well. She's put on weight because you do a lot of eating in aged care. She's made a lot of friends. She's the oldest person there, but she still walks around unassisted. She looks like the youngest person there. And she's genuinely really happy and just talks about how great the experience is. So I would say be prepared for a lot of upfront pain. But eventually you are doing it in their best interest, and hopefully they'll eventually come around.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it's good from our viewpoint, we get to see the financial side, and sometimes the value we can bring is to, I guess, be a bit detached from that emotion. But I think it's good for you to have that, I guess, understanding from the other side of the conversation, allow you to really relate to it in a bit more detail.
Yeah.
So what sort of things, when we talk about the conversation, what sort of things do you think people should be thinking about early on in the piece and talking about?
Things like where you'd like to be placed, or where you'd like the person to be placed. Location can be close to family. That's right, because they're the ones who are going to be visiting and helping out. So you want to make it easy for as possible for that to happen. Not necessarily where they grew up or
where they used to live, because they'll think they want to live in that area, but if they want visitors, it needs to be convenient for the visitors.
And also things like what kind of facilities you want, or services you want provided, because it can vary across each facility as well. So visiting, having a look of the fields, getting a feel of the place is also good to do before you sign off and make it.
And also the level of care, I suppose, because there's different levels of care that you can go into, which we're going to touch on a little bit more about the process. But considering, like your nan being still reasonably independent, what level of care compared to somebody who has more, I guess, important health challenges in the short term.
Yeah, that's it. And do you go to a place where it just offers the one level of care, or do they have the ability where you've made this big move and you finally got them there, that you probably don't want to have to move them again if they're going from low level to high level care in the future, that if they can stay in the same place, that will make it much easier.
Yeah, that's good. So we've got a slide here which is just showing some of the, I guess, stats around life expectancy, because as we were talking about in preparing, a lot of people think it's not a major consideration because you're not going to make it to this sort of age, or you can stay, but your nan's even bucking the trend of the highest numbers on this slide. So it does happen. So maybe talk us through this a bit.
Yeah, and this even happens with retiree clients. And so when we're doing projections for their retirement, we'll always make sure the projections are going well into their 90s. And I had a client 2 weeks ago say, Kathryn, I don't know why you do projections into my 90s. I'm not going to be here, but the odds are that they likely are. So with this slide here, the statistic at the top left there says that what people expect to live to, and then on the right side is what they will actually live to. It's also important to note that when they talk about life expectancy, it's from 0. When you've actually survived a good portion of time and you reach 65, your life expectancy isn't the life expectancy figure from 0, it's from now. So it is much higher than you expect. So, and here we've got we know that life expectancy is greatly improved over time, and it's going to keep improving as well. So over the next 25 years with medical advancements and such, it's going to just keep growing higher and higher. So it's important that people think, I won't make it to aged care, but it's a consideration. And then if you're part of a couple, your chance of life expectancy increases even further, that one of you is going to even make it to 93. So it's yeah, it's a very good number. And I know a lot of people don't want to get there, but my nan's a testament that you can get to 99 and still be in pretty good health. But yeah, so it's a lot of our work with retirees is getting them to acknowledge, no, this is something we can put on the back burner, but we still need to start some discussions.
Yeah. Not
right now, but later.
I think the other thing is, by having the discussions, there are other options which might be able to be considered. So there's more options now around, in-home care or being able to stay in your own home and access those types of services. And so, the sooner you start talking about that or looking into that or getting some advice around those areas can also help to, I guess, maybe in some ways ease your mind, in that you don't need to be going, it's not all about moving into an aged care. And we just had a comment come through from one of our viewers talking about it called caged care, which is maybe a little bit of what your nan was thinking about. So it doesn't have to be all about the caged care, but there are different ways of tackling it. And the reality is we're all going to probably need some sort of support in some sort of level at some point in time. So start that conversation and see how we go. So once we've had the conversation and the relevant people have been involved and we've started thinking about what might be the outcome that we're looking for, what's the sort of process that would normally be followed?
Yeah, well, the first thing you will need to look at, to your point of the different levels of care. So the government is starting to acknowledge that while there's a lot of people, I think it's, I can't remember the statistic, there's a lot of people in aged care and it's just growing. And I know I saw on the news last night that in Western Sydney, they're building a huge aged care development there, because at the moment, I don't think they can build enough to satisfy demand. But what people generally think about when they think about aged care, the older terms, like the terms that have been around for years, so like retirement village. So there's a big difference between retirement villages and actual aged care. Retirement villages are generally your over 65s living, where you buy into a place. You're not necessarily receiving any like hands-on care, but there's cares in the complex. But generally these are run by private companies where you'll pay for your house, and when you move out, they're likely to keep 20 to 30% of what you paid. This isn't government regulated like actual aged care. Aged care is government regulated. It runs in conjunction with like human services and Centrelink, and has really strict guidelines of what the costs are, how people can access it, and how they can afford it. So our second level there is help at home care, and this is actually the biggest growing area in aged care, and the government in the recent budget threw a lot more money into it. Not enough, but because apparently I've heard that the waiting list at the moment for at home care is about 6 months. And these are people who are happy to live at home and, can look after themselves to some capacity and can cook for themselves, but they just need a bit of help with a couple of things around the house. So it's getting some home care.
So how does that kind of structured? What does that look like? Is it, you know, one provider, or do you have to organise, you know, all different providers to come in or do different things, or how does that sort of play out at home care?
Yeah, well, there's two different levels, and there's you do get the choice of provider, and you know, it can be really low level care, 1 or 2 services, so they call that home support, or there's home care where it's more complex needs and someone's there on a daily basis.
And that might be more medical.
Yeah, that's
as
right.
opposed to just the you know, maintenance of the house or Yeah,
so I would say if you're thinking about care for an older person, at home care, you really have to get on that early because you could be waiting quite a while to access that service. And then if you're looking at actual aged care accommodation, this is where you're moving into a facility permanently. You've got 2 types of care. So a lot of people know it as nursing home. They've definitely removed that terminology, but it's now known as low level care or high level care. So the low level care, that's what my nan's in at the moment. They call it, it used to be known as hostel care, or so this is where people get confused between retirement village and aged care, low level care. The low level care is you're actually getting medical assistance when you need it. You're getting meals cooked for you. You're in one facility and you probably have a room in that facility. The high level care is where you're getting the people who really can't look after themselves, and they're getting full-time nursing care in that facility. So back to your question, Jeff, of, you know, what's the process? And a lot of the time we do see it quite often with a few of our clients or our clients' parents, where they give us a call and they say, my mum is in the hospital, she's in respite care because she's had a big fall. I have 2 weeks to get her into aged care because they're going to not throw her out of hospital, but they would like to move her out of hospital. What do I do? So this is where it's come up suddenly, but you know, if you're lucky enough to have a bit more lead time, you can consider the options and look around. So when you've got someone who's in respite care who needs to move quite quickly, you might be finding that you're actually really limited with what your choices are, where you can go. But the process does get sped up because the hospitals and human services know that this is urgent. So the first thing you need to do is get approval for being into aged care. So you can't just buy an aged care room and then just, you know, put that on the back burner and that's ready to go later. You need to have an assessment. So it's called an ACAT assessment. So the aged care assessment team will come and assess the person who wants to go into aged care of what their abilities are and what they're able to do and how they're able to look after themselves. So from that, the big distinguishing part there is, are they okay to be in low level aged care, or do they need to be in high level aged care? Generally, if they're in respite care, they're probably going to go straight into high level care. But I know they're really good in the hospitals that they will help you organise this pretty fast. But if you're doing it pretty early and trying to plan for the future, yeah, you can get the ACAT assessment done.
So if you are, you know, getting out in front of it and trying to be a bit organised, you request it through the myagedcare.gov, and then what happens? Somebody comes out. Who should be there? How's that process sort of carried out?
Yeah, usually, obviously, the person getting assessed needs to be there.
That's a good idea.
key component.
Yeah.
But also, anyone who's there to help, you know, provide care for that person and help make decisions as well, to answer any questions that the person who's getting assessed might not be able to answer as well. And also, as a note, this is not necessarily just for the aged care accommodation, but also home care as well, accessing home care packages. You need an ACAT assessment to access that. And they do expire after a time where you need to refresh it. So if you are getting on the front foot and taking our advice in that, just be mindful that, that after a period of time, not tracker of the time frame. You will need to get a reassessment if you haven't had any.
Or if their circumstance change and they might need a new assessment.
And so the person who comes out to do the assessment, I assume that they're medically trained in some way, shape or form to be able to make that assessment, because it's primarily sort of medical focus. Okay.
So once you have your ACAT assessment, I made a note of that previous one, that the myagecare.gov.au website. This is a really, really good website. This will be your first port of call, because they have some great videos of the whole process and discussion points and how to approach it. So you can book in your ACAT assessment on that website. You can also find places that have availability. So on the website, you say, I'm after a low-level aged care facility in this broad area, and it will come up with the options and what the cost of that room is and the likely services fees. And then, but you're quite able to go and visit these places as well, and they will show you the room. You can take the person if they're able to, and show them around and see the options there. So it's pretty good. It's I really recommend that website. I mean, even we refer to that website too. And like Mel said, that location is important, and the location is, if it's your grandma or parent, put it near you. Don't worry about where they want to be. It won't matter where they are. They're there. But if you want, it's best if they're close to you. But that comes down to availability too. So I know, Mel, you've got a client who's just put his wife in, and he struggled to really get a place near him out in the northwest.
That's a challenge. And again, you can start earlier, no guarantee of success, but hopefully it gives you a bit more time to work through some of that process. So again, just referring to the process, it's get the assessment first, because that kind of then dictates what level of service and what type of place you might need to look at, because there's no point going out and finding something which you really like and then not kind of qualifying, I don't know if that's the right word, but not being able to access that facility.
And I'm pretty sure the facilities will say, do you have an ACAT assessment before you can come and look.
Okay.
So the third process, what does it cost?
So I mean, that's the all important one, obviously, and as I said earlier, that's the one where we sort of get more involved. But I think it's important if we can help sometimes facilitate some of those conversations and steer you in the right direction in regards to the resources, our experience in how to deal with the different facilities and the homes and the conversations you need to have. And I guess we're even getting some experience with different places and how they stack up in terms of the services they provide or delivering, which obviously that's come under a lot of scrutiny this year. And we're not going to go into that in any detail today, because that's been dealt with at another level, but certainly we will have some experience in that area we can share. But when the rubber hits the road is in regards to the costs, Mel. So what do we need to think about there?
So it can be a bit of a complicated area, and essentially there's an initial or entry cost into aged care, as well as ongoing costs as well. So if we break it down into that, the price of the room can be paid up front or ongoing. Or a mix of both. And then again, it has different assessments as well, from both a Centrelink perspective and also an ongoing calculation. So we'll delve into that a little bit later. The daily care fee. So this is where it doesn't matter how much money you have or don't have, everyone pays the daily care fee, which is equivalent to 85% of the full age pension for a single person. And so that's like the basic fee that for an ongoing basis.
And that doesn't matter if you're getting the age pension or not.
That's right. That's just how it's calculated. Then with the means tested care fee, this is an ongoing fee as well. And that's basically an assessment of your assets and income. If you're a single or a couple, we'll have different assessments, and that will feed into an ongoing fee as well. It's also a different assessment to Centrelink. to further complicate it.
Yeah.
The last sort of level of fees is either extra or additional services fees. And this can depend on the facility. So where they might offer sort of premium services for their residents, that can either be bundled in with the ongoing fee as well, or an ad hoc basis, depending on the provider and how they structure their fee.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that some of these fees are, legislated by government, and some of them are going to be variable. So what are the ones that, might be variable? I assume the price of the room, depending on location, and then the additional services, are they the kind of main ones?
Yep. So there's sort of a base level of the room fee, and which is mandated by government. Anything above that sort of has to be justified by the provider, but depending on location and the refurbishment or the I suppose how recent the facility was built, that can increase into, well, if you're looking around Sydney east, the millions. So that can vary widely. The basic care and the means tested care are regulated by the government, mandated by the government. They've set their assessments of those. And then the extra and additional service fees is not government subsidised, so they don't have any say really in that.
Depends on what they want to do and spend money on.
That's right.
Yep.
Okay, so with the ongoing care costs, as I touched on, there's the daily care fee and the means tested care fee. And if you have only paid part of the initial cost into the refundable deposit into the room, there is also a daily accommodation payment of the balance.
Right.
So those will be the three main components of your ongoing fees, and then the extra services fee is the additional optional one that will be on top of that. So we've got the refundable accommodation deposit, so that's the cost of the room. If you pay that in full, you won't have any daily accommodation payment. You'll just pay the basic daily fee and the means tested fee. That RAD, as we call it, doesn't count towards your age pension. So that is essentially an exempt asset for your Centrelink assessment, but for your means tested fee, it does count as an asset.
Yeah.
So that's where the main difference in that assessment there. If you have a home that you don't have a spouse or another dependent living there, that will count up to 2 years of being in your home if you don't sell it and rent it out.
So I think a lot of the value that we provide in this area is the fact that, like you say, what is happening with aged care fees and assessments is still different from what happens to your Centrelink and age pension assessment. And there's a few different options of, keep the home, rent out the home, and all these kind of things. So, this is where it starts to really get complicated.
Yeah, and how much of a deposit you should put in. So if you've got the ability to put a deposit in, do you just put it all in as the, to buy it outright, or is there other things you can do to manage that process as well? Actually, is an important consideration. So you talked about the RAD being a refundable deposit. So how does that work?
So that anything that you put towards the RAD payment initially will be refunded back to either the person or the estate once they leave the home, either moving to another home or moving out of the home or passing away. So that money will come back to them in some shape or form.
And it will come back to what was paid, not like a retirement village where 70% comes back.
That's an important differentiation, isn't
it?
And if you do pay part of it by a daily accommodation payment, that amount isn't refundable back to you. So that's
it's only the initial payment.
That's right.
So what the homes do is with the refundable deposit is they get that lump sum and then they earn money on that lump sum. But if you're going to not give them the lump sum, you pay an amount as if they were earning on that lump sum. So it's the same to them. It's the same outcome to them, but it's just how it affects you financially.
Okay. So the existing home and that side of things, we've got a bit of sort of high level information there, but as Kathryn sort of alluded to, can become quite complicated to work out the different moving parts around there, and which is quite hard to address the right way to go about that.
Well, it's client specific. Yeah.
So when you get to that stage and you're looking at getting closer to making a decision around, you know, what type of care is needed and what the timing might be, that's the time when you can start crunching some numbers and doing some projections around how that might look in terms of costs and that sort of thing. So you don't have to leave that until you've made a decision. Best to sort of start talking about, you know, what options you've got and whether you do want to keep the home or not keep the home. And I guess I'm not sure whether yeah, I mean, that was what I was going to say, but we didn't want to steal the thunder of the next slide. But, you know, if there's more than 2 people involved, that's obviously an additional complication in terms of where they go and how that works.
Yeah, that's right. So every situation will be a bit different. Sometimes it might be easier if there's only one person to consider, and if they're single or widowed, or you know, in terms of the financial perspective of things. But talking, you know, considering how to fund the initial and ongoing and what's the right mix of both. With a couple, you start thinking about effectively you're funding 2 lifestyles there. And so how do you then, you know, split and dice that up so that...
That's it, yeah, because your living expenses, like a couple or a single person, it isn't 50%. Running a house is, you know, so you essentially... having a huge increase in living expenses when you have illness separated couples.
So that's something that needs to be balanced and considered when you're making these decisions about what's the best way to fund it, because you might, if you put too much focus on one or the other, then you could be leaving someone out. Also, where you can, retaining the age pension benefit, because you get access to the pension card and the healthcare card, which gives you a lot of discounts and reduces that cost of living. And then I guess also, the considerations, which we kind of keep harping back to location, but again, it's part of that that social and emotional and aspect of the support that you need when you're going through this big life change.
I think the other thing that's come up recently in some conversations I've had with clients and friends as well is when you've got a couple talking about the needs, they're not always going to be progressing at the same rate, or so if you can have the conversation earlier when both people are in a good place to have that conversation, and in some ways it can help to take the burden off the person who has to make that decision, because it's a really tough decision if you've been in a couple for 60 years and caring for each other, to then say somebody needs to move into a facility and get extra care. That's a really tough thing to do, particularly if that person who's having to move is not really with it and able to make that decision. So if you can have that conversation earlier, you can relieve that burden a little bit. If the person, if each person agrees that when the time comes, I'm okay for you to make this decision, and you need to make the decision in the best interest of both people, because it's not just the person moving into the care, it's the person who might be staying at home and doing all the care at the time.
Well, they might not even, if they're both being assessed for care, they might not get the same assessment results. So you might have one who needs to be in high level and one in low level. And you've got complications there as well.
So if you can have that conversation, it helps all the family members who are going to make that decision to know that you're okay with whatever path is chosen, and you want them to help you to make that right decision and to look after you at the time. And to your point earlier, usually it's not going to be the case. No one is probably, well, not many people are going to sit down there and go, just ship me off into caged care, as was referred to before. But it's important to have that conversation earlier, so you can relieve the burden of everybody associated to know you've got a plan.
There's a lot of guilt, I think, and a lot of times where you think that you could do more, or you try and hang on for as long as possible, and that might prevent you from making the decisions that need to be made. With all these areas of to consider, and and that sort of paralysis of making a decision might cost you, the placement that you wanted, or the location,
or even the lifestyle impact on the person who's not going into aged care. We've had a couple of clients, especially like couples where the husband needs to go into aged care and the wife's been trying to look after him for 6, 12, 24 months, but the impact on them is very hard, because they need to be looking after this person they might be struggling. I've got one recent client who said, was looking after him. She's like, he's a big man, like he's bigger than me. I can't shower him properly or whatever. But yeah, I think the giving permission of, your partner wants you to continue your lifestyle. They don't want to be the burden, and they don't want to be impacting on your ability to continue living your life. It's a good point to have that discussion. And
yeah, it's about the quality of life, isn't it? Because as we talked about before, there can be a great deal of longevity, more than what you might think, and more than what probably used to be the case when people would retire at 65 and depart at 70 or whatever it might be. So it's that quality of life
for both of them.
For everybody.
And that's it. The earlier you get help, it might stop that slide of worsening health or mental health.
That's right. So the comment there about cost of care versus length of stay, what's that referring to?
Yeah, well, and this can be another really hard area to discuss. And I was discussing with that client, I was just using this example where a husband went into care, and there was a few financial things to consider of, do we pay this RAD, or the fact that you've just sold your house and she's downsized, she now has extra money. Do we put that into the RAD, or do we put that money into super, taking a gamble of how long is her husband going to be in aged care? And it was a very quick downward slide for him, and he was only in there for less than 6 months. But some days he might look like he was going to be in there 3 years. So there was a bit of a making a financial call of, we've got this opportunity to put this in super, which is going to be better for her in the long term. It's going to be a harder financial burden initially, but in the long term, we think it was going to be a better play. Whereas if this person's going to be in care for a long time, they're in low level care, or there's going to be a long time situation, well, then it might make sense to make that financial contribution into the RAD. Length of stay can actually be a consideration when it comes to finances. And because it's going to cost you a bit to be in these places.
Yeah, and again, it's probably not a right or wrong or one size fits all answer on that. It depends on each individual circumstances. And again, if you can have the conversation early, if you've got options, which is great. So if coming back to our, financial planning roots is, if you're well prepared for retirement years and you've got the assets and the super balance and that sort of thing, it also opens up those opportunities, as opposed to, without that, you're limited to what you can do, and you're not going to have that conversation. You're just going to do whatever you can at the time. So we've got a little while to go. So if there's any questions, we've had a few comments come through, and thank you for those. But any questions that anyone has, now's a good time to send those through. But as we start to wrap up, just thinking about who can help and where do we go, and how does that sort of process play out? This is a very popular website, which we've referred to a number of occasions, but what else can you suggest?
Well, even talking to other people who've gone through the process, I know that you've had a mate recently talk to you, and just because from your role as a financial planner and what you could assist there. I mean, a lot of people probably in your generation, if you're going through it, have already gone through it. Try and find someone else who's gone through it. They might not know all the money aspects, but they will know maybe how to broach it, or they might even be familiar with your situation and can suggest something like that. That wonderful website. The aged care facilities themselves too, if you're looking into the accommodation, they're very good too. You can go in, they do this all day, every day. They've got a good understanding of what the basic fees are. They won't necessarily be able to tell you what's the best thing to do financially, because they don't know your full situation or the person's full situation, but they're very good at saying, these are the fees. I quite often, if we get a client call in and say, I'm going through this, what do I need to know? Give them a rundown of this, and I'll say, go to a place, find out their fees, tell me the fees, I'll do the calcs for mean tested and all those, because the place won't be able to give you a means tested idea. But from there, if you can give me what the accommodation cost is and what the services fees are, we can work out the rest and start from there, work out what's the best thing to do for their situation and or the partner situation, and what does that look like going into the future?
Yeah, no, that's great. We just had a great question come in from Martin. Thanks, Martin. So do nursing homes generally prefer full RAD or extra daily fees? How much of an interest rate do they effectively charge?
Like Kathryn said, it's for them, they don't really have a preference because they will receive the ongoing payment as interest essentially on that outstanding amount.
Mm-hmm.
That interest rate is mandated by the government. So at the moment, I think it's about 4.5, 4.3%.
Yeah.
It's which is still
pretty high
compared to the current cash
It
rate.
has come down. It used to be 5.7. So yeah.
So they do adjust it. Given the interest rates around, but they're still quite high compared to the normal cash rate.
I don't think they're putting in cash for that rate.
Yeah. So they can't. The aged care facility can't make you pay one way or the other.
Mm-hmm.
They leave it to you to decide. And in terms of there is a minimum level of assets that the resident needs to be left with, which is about 46,000. And that needs to be, so if you want to pay the full RAD and that leaves you with nothing left, they actually legally can't accept it in the first 28 days. After that, you can pay more if you want, that's fine. So you can pay into the RAD at a later stage as lump sum payments, and that will reduce the ongoing interest cost to you as well. So they are very flexible in terms of the payment options, but at the end of the day, the cost of the room is the cost of the room. You cannot really negotiate that down.
I think that's an important point that they can't mandate that you have to pay upfront or ongoing. Like that's important for people to know when they're going to talk to different facilities.
Yeah, that's it. And also, if you say to the facility, I want to pay the RAD, the lump sum, you actually have 6 months to pay that. You don't need to rock up and bring your check, because they know that you're likely to have to sell a house here. And that can take time. So you've got 6 months to pay it. Yeah.
Okay. So we've touched on some of these, the areas where we can provide advice and assistance, but maybe in the last couple of minutes, if there's no more questions, we can kind of run through this and talk a bit about how we can help and how we have helped other people.
Yep. I think with as we sort of touched on, it can be a very complex area with the intersection of aged care costs and Centrelink and your personal circumstances being very different, whether it's a single couple and their care needs. So really being able to put those together in different scenarios and give you, okay, well, option A is this, if we do this, X, Y, Z. If we choose this combination instead, what does that mean? So being able to visualize that and project that over time will give you a bit more information to make that decision as to what's going to be right fit for you. So again, initial and ongoing costs, what's the mix of paying up front, paying ongoing, how does that fit in with if you're a couple and having to support another person, what kind of assets you have and what are they going to provide for you in terms of income. Centrelink as well, how is that assessed and what Centrelink benefits you can get from that to help supplement. If you have proceeds from the sale of a home, what's the best way to invest that if you're investing it, and to again help you provide with that ongoing income. So many ways that you can slice and dice it, and so it will be really, really dependent on what your goals and your particular circumstances are.
And I think as you talked about, often the common scenario is the person's sick and it's a quick decision needs to be made. And that's where the finance side of things is really a hard one to get your head around when you're worrying about the personal side of things and the health side of things. So that's where obviously we can add a lot of value there in taking care of most of this in terms of the paperwork and all that sort of thing. But preference would be to have it factored into a plan so that you can take your time then to make the right thing. You still go through the same process, but just do it in advance so that you know the different options that might be available. And I don't know that it's too early ever to start thinking about it. And as we said, better to have that conversation, get a plan, get everybody involved and know, well, this is if it happens in the short term, this is how we might approach it. And then you check in on those details as you get closer.
It's also important to note as well when you're getting someone in a home, like Kathryn said, you've got time to actually make those payments, but also with the means tested fee, if you do have an overpayment, that gets refunded to you. So when there's a quarterly assessment of your fees in aged care. So if they assess that, they review what you've paid for the last quarter, and if you've actually had a change in assets, or they calculated incorrectly when you first go in, because you obviously have a few different moving parts then. If there's an overpayment, they will refund that back to you. If there's an underpayment, they won't make you pay that. They'll just charge you the new fee going forward. So, there's no necessarily urgent rush to make sure that you're getting the right. Obviously, you'd like to get it right the first time, but you've got time basically to get everything in place.
That's great. So I think we're coming up right on time, so we'll wrap up there. But thank you very much, Mel. Thank you, Kathryn, for your expertise. Thanks for everybody for listening in and tuning in. A copy of the presentation and the recording from here will be coming out in our newsletter this afternoon. It will be available up on our website, along with a blog which covers off. So if you'd like to read more than listen, you can have a look at the blog as well, which has got some similar detail, particularly around the costs and the process. And you can check that out. Also, our other 7 webinars from the year are available via the website as well, so you can check in on those. This is going to be our final webinar for the year. We're not going to subject you to any more over the festive season, but we do want to continue in the new year. So if you have any ideas as to what you would like to hear more about, please do let us know by contacting your advisor or shooting us an email. We'd love to hear about that. So that we can continue to provide relevant content. Hopefully you've found it useful this year. And one more comment, that's great. So we'll leave it there. Thanks again, guys, for your expertise. And for now, everyone, please stay healthy, wealthy and happy. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.